Welcome to Redirect, Immigration Law and Perspectives, a weekly dive into the world of immigration law and its human consequences. I'm your host, Stephen Robbins, joined shortly by co-host and fellow immigration attorney Matthew Archambault. We've got a producer, his name's Jeremiah Britt, and he's amazing, and he's editing this show, and he's a cool guy. You should give him a follow on Twitter, @JeremiahBritt. So a few weeks ago, I tweeted out that for every big immigration story you hear about in the news, there's like 5 to 10 other stories of varying degrees of importance that you never hear about. Little technical things, making simple processes more difficult, or getting rid of critical tools altogether, that sort of thing. And I've really wanted to do a show where we dig into some of that stuff, because after I tweeted this, a lot of people were like, well, what are you talking about? The problem is terrible, terrible things keep happening. And it feels a little frivolous to complain about some of those smaller things in light of all of this. And so we're going to talk with Matthew about the terrorist attack in El Paso, about the raid in Mississippi, and just trying to grapple with two things at the same time. People are smart and complex, and online, maybe not just online, but there's this sense that it's all one thing or another, right? It's either all Trump's fault or not Trump's fault at all. But the reality is that we need to be able to both call out the current leadership for what they are while recognizing our own troubled past and letting that not just to score points, Trump's bad, so let's have a Democrat, that sort of thing. But let's let these things guide us to a better future. I mean, what do we want? Do we want to live in a country where, like, every once in a while, hundreds of people are just randomly arrested because they work here? Or do we want something better, right? Do we like those pictures of kids in cages, or do we think that maybe we should structure our society in such a way that that's not a thing? Enjoy the conversation with Matthew. If you like the show, you can go to patreon.com/redirect. Throw a few dollars our way. For every 100 patrons, we take a pro bono asylum case. So that's cool. You can contribute to that. And we're on Spotify. We're on iTunes, Stitcher. Leave a review, subscribe, tell a friend. Here is the episode this week. Matthew, I was thinking about something. I don't know that it means anything. It's just a thought that I've been having, which is...
Probably means nothing.
You know how the thing with Bush... George W. Bush was that people said that they would rather have a beer with him than with Al Gore, right? Al Gore was like this stuffy, robotic politician, but Bush seemed like kind of a cool dude, right? And other than the war crimes, it's kind of true, right?
Yeah.
He's
put all the war crime stuff aside.
Yeah. We're going to set aside the maybe 1 million dead Iraqi civilians and just focus on his sort of folksy, he's a little self-deprecating. He seems to have a sense of humor. He owned a baseball team. That's kind of cool. He's like a cool dude, right?
Yeah.
But then when I think about Trump, and I want to play this clip of him at the hospital, it just seems like it would be absolute misery to spend any amount of time with him. I mean, he's just a f***ing asshole. And like, everyone knows it. His supporters know it. It's like the inverse of the George W. Bush, I want to have a beer with this guy phenomenon. He's just the worst person. And I know this is a hot take.
Yeah, no one's ever thought of this before.
I know, but Jesus, So Trump goes to El Paso.
Yeah. Healer in chief. Uniter in chief. Mm-hmm. Healer
of all wounds. Here he is.
I was here 3 months ago. We made a speech, and we had a what was the name of the arena? That place.
He's literally in a hospital room with people who they just got done operating on like terror victims. He needs help remembering the name of the arena.
We made a speech, and we had a what was the name of the arena? That place was packed, right?
I was front row.
Right? The judges are respected.
I was front row.
What was the name?
I was front row there.
Good. Come here, man. That was some crowd.
Thank you.
And we had twice the number outside. And then you had this crazy Beto. Beto had like 400 people in a parking lot. They said his crowd was wonderful.
Look at me.
But we had some...
Look at that.
Whoa, oh, wow, look at that. Look at that, Judge. You see that?
I was encouraging her.
Don't tell it to the press because they won't even believe it.
No.
So this is video that they released, right?
No.
The White House?
No.
So someone inside?
This is someone's cell phone. The video they released, I don't think there's any audio. They did music over it because it's just the same.
Did you see the photo of him or Melania holding the orphan baby? And he's giving a big smile and a big thumbs up?
Yeah, there's a guy who can read a room. Just...
What? This baby's orphaned? Both the baby's parents died and it survived? Big thumbs up.
This baby would never believe how unfairly the press treats me. This baby
baby gets it.
Would not even understand. So first of all, like, it's the same riff as always. I'm so popular. Nobody talks about it. I'm the victim. I'm the ultimate victim here. And then, of course, riddled with just lies. That twice the number of people in the stadium were outside of the stadium. And it's just all BS.
So people say, though, he's like very charming and people that know him personally and on a personal level. The only reason I could see people want to hang out with him would be because of his money, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Be because like, oh, I get to ride in his jet or something. I find it hard to believe that people actually like him on a personal level.
There's that video of him and Jeffrey Epstein with the cheerleaders of the...
When he's doing the white man overbite.
Yeah. You know, they're kind of like rubbing shoulders and pointing at girls, and he's saying she's hot. There's this high school bully thing about him.
I bet he like ruffles up people's hair.
Just like...
Hey, Steven, how you doing? You know, like ruffle up your hair.
Yeah.
You should do that to Biden. They should each ruffle each other's hair. That should be the whole debate. I would pay for that.
In a way, it's like the George W. Bush thing applies, except instead of wanting to have a beer with a guy, like, hey, this guy seems like a cool dude, they want to be cool in high school. They want to be accepted by just the worst circle of people in high school. Because this guy is the kind of guy who's like, yeah, let's get some pussy. She's fat. He's that guy, but sundowning old guy who's also in charge of everything. So it says something about like the American psyche that we went from we wanted to be able to have a beer with the guy in charge to we want the guy in charge to just be like a total douchebag. Anyways, it's a 4-second clip. Some people were wondering, boy, this whole hospital tour seemed like a really weird photo op. And here's Trump at the hospital.
I want to thank everybody. How do we get some kind of a picture here? How do we do it?
Definitely my first thought when I go visit some victims, how can we get everyone...
Should we do a selfie? Or no, we have a photographer. We can do that.
Right.
Where's the best lighting? That person in the gurney. Yeah, the one that's bleeding. Can you roll him out? It's really a downer. Really a downer.
Is this guy sleeping or is he unconscious? Like, should we just go ahead and take it, or can we wake him up? Okay, is there a way to wake him up?
Now, these are the nurses. Do you have any more attractive nurses?
I thought nurses were hot.
Do you have any Latino nurses? Just, mix it up a little bit.
Right. It's really disturbing. Now, the crazy thing about El Paso is we've had a lot of these shootings, and in this case, we have no way of knowing what could have possibly motivated this guy.
I think it's clear.
It's a total mystery.
No, it's not, Stephen.
If only he had written down some thoughts.
Stephen, it's not. No, stop. Stop it. We know why.
Fortnite.
Okay. So we know it's video games in mental health.
I like that we assigned video games before we even knew, and I don't even know if we still know, that this guy had ever played a video game.
Of course he has. He's a mass shooter. Come on, Stephen, Have you not been paying attention?
I'm sorry.
And he has serious mental health issues. And how do we know that? He's a mass shooter.
Right.
I mean, this is all very evident. And then you talk about the manifesto. Apparently he was an environmentalist. And that I think that was probably his motivating factor. He just wanted to rid the earth of humans because it would be better for the environment. So Jay Inslee, hello.
When will Jay Inslee be brought to
when's he going to apologize? When's he going to acknowledge that his words on the environment caused this? Did you think there was something else? I mean, we covered it, right?
I think that's pretty
Yeah.
much it.
Okay.
Yeah, if only he had written down sort of a clear, concise summary of his thoughts and motivations. If only we had something like that, then we could know.
He's probably too busy playing video games for that.
Clearly too busy playing video games. You and I have talked a lot about mass shootings. What was our first?
Our first mass shooting? Is that like our first date? I don't even know.
I think we talked about Sandy Hook, but
That was too long ago, right?
it feels like there's not a lot to say. There's a lot of smarter people who've already said things, but I do think that it's important that we focus on. So it was an act of terror. We do know his motivations. They were very specific. He was concerned about an immigrant invasion, and he wanted to explicitly make it so that Mexicans would not come here, to create a sense of fear, which is working. So that part of his sort of goal, mission accomplished, right? People are scared. People are second guessing. Like, I feel like Mexican food. What if some nut job decides to continue this trend? Whatever, even if it's a little thing in the back of your mind. That's one of the goals of terrorism, obviously, to make people afraid. But then the very next day, the president comes out and says, boy, you know, what a sad thing. We really should have immigration reform, which is the other explicit goal of this guy, to accomplish not just immigration reform, but a specific type, right?
Yeah, I think traditionally immigration reform pre-Trump meant something positive. Now immigration reform means to restrict immigration, legal and unlawful, as much as possible. But when he tries to tie this terrorist act to not only gun measures, but to immigration restriction, it's gross, right?
It's totally gross. And you could imagine let's say there was a terror attack of the classic variety, the only kind that most Americans consider to be actual terror. And let's say the terrorists demanded that we, I don't know, move our embassy in Jerusalem or something. And then let's say the president, like the very next day, was like, okay, we'll do it. That would be not well received by a lot of people, right? Because you're conceding.
I think one thing with Trump is people didn't really believe what he says. Even his supporters. I don't really think, he just says stuff. And I don't think anyone takes it all that seriously. No one should take it all that seriously, except maybe white nationalists and white supremacists who, want to take his clues. But I mean, does anyone really think he's serious about gun control? That anything is going to happen? I think the only thing that would possibly happen with gun control is somehow to make it more difficult for people of color to get guns. So I'm sure they're frantic in the back rooms of the West Wing going, okay, what can we do on gun control that makes it harder for people of color?
Well, or something that like, we're going to run background checks that only screen for like left-wing rhetoric in your social media. So like if you've ever tweeted anything about Antifa, then
or
no guns for you. Right. No, I mean, he's definitely not serious about gun control, for sure. The point is, and the point of my probably really bad example is that, like, he's clearly on the side of the shooter, maybe not in the form of the tactic. Like, I'm sure he would at least say that he disagrees with the tactic. But the end goal, I mean, they share it, right? They have the same goal.
Well, I mean, what's the goal of the Remain in Mexico, the MPP program? The goal is, right, to scare people, to send vulnerable people back into Mexico, where they're not from. They're from Honduras or El Salvador or whatnot, where they're being threatened and harmed and persecuted and subject to all these horrible things. The goal is to terrorize these people so they won't come here, right? Their whole goal is deterrence and, quite frankly, punishment. And so when this terrorist comes and shoots up a shopping center that he knows is filled with Latinos, Mexicans, and people of Mexican descent, his goal is to terrorize people. These people, Mexicans or Latinos, right? The administration's goal is to terrorize Latinos and Mexicans and other immigrants. So they actually have the same goal. Now, the method is admittedly slightly different, but they do share the same goals.
But the other thing about so Cody Johnston, he's a comedian / I don't know, he's a podcaster.
Isn't he a second baseman for the...
Not everyone is a baseball player, Matt.
Doesn't it sound like he'd be like a second baseman for like the Reds? I'm just saying.
He does a show called Some More News, and he did a video about how the president definitely
I bet he used to play baseball.
Okay. Definitely wants to shoot people on the border. People should check it out. I think it's on YouTube. And he played a series of clips of Trump saying, like, boy, in some countries, they would just shoot him. I'm not going to do that because people would be mad. And just like dripping with this sort of sarcasm, Trump just being his bully, crappy douchebag. So.
If he gets reelected, I could totally see that happening. I mean, they're already using tear gas on the border. Well, first of all, CBP has already shot and killed people like across the border. So it just happens, right?
People who have allegedly thrown rocks, be fair.
Yeah, because God forbid someone just like step back 10 feet so they don't get hit by that rock. But
but there's lots of these examples. And if you're at a Trump rally and Trump's going, it would be really effective. It would be really effective if we could just shoot him.
Yeah.
But we can't because the pussy liberals won't let us.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to do that.
All them snowflakes.
Boy, all I'm saying is, I mean, what possible message could you be receiving from that other than maybe we should go shoot some people?
One of the defenses of him is he's just joking. He's a big jokester and you guys can't take him serious. Now, that might be a great defense if he was on stage at the Improv, right? And he wasn't president of the United States.
It still wouldn't be funny, but
I wouldn't be funny, but it would be like, oh, I get it. You are a comedian. You're trying out a joke. It's not funny, but yeah, we don't take you serious. But as president, the thing is, I think a lot of people do see him in that role as an entertainer. So they don't take him serious in talking about his supporters. And they're like, yeah, he's just joking. He's just goofing. He's a goof. He's an entertainer. Why are you guys taking him so literally? But then you have people like the terrorists in El Paso, they do. First of all, I'm sure the terrorist in El Paso was a white supremacist before Trump got into office. I'm not going to say that Trump converted this guy from a Buddhist monk, to a white nationalist.
Right.
But the terrorist was able to take his words and be inspired by them and commit this act. Just like, people who have ISIS who go and commit terror in the name of ISIS or Al-Qaeda and all that. A lot of these are lone wolf actors who have been radicalized by the words and inspiration of ISIS. And I think it's really the same thing. And it's one thing for white nationalists to be on 8chan and 4chan and all those little places that they hide and talk amongst each other and say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we went down and just shot up a bunch of Mexicans? That's just some random anonymous person on the internet. But when the president is kind of giving a nod and a wink to it, that holds some sway, right? I think that puts a lot more juice into it. And it would be nice if he used this as a moment of self-reflection to say, yeah, I was really joking about all that. It was really entertainment, but I see how my words may have affected the situation.
Right.
He would never admit that was his intention or anything. But so if some guy came out and listened to our show and took whatever I said and said, geez, that's an inspiration, I'm going to go out and shoot up a lot of people and kill a lot of people, I would have a big, deep moment of reflection because I'm like, well, that's not what I wanted anyone to do. But what did I say that made someone believe that? And maybe I would change my words. I don't know.
Right.
I know you wouldn't because you're very stubborn.
Well, the Dayton, Ohio shooter actually had some vague leftist politics. And I know the same guy I mentioned earlier, Cody Johnston, the shooter had followed Cody's work in that show. And so on their latest podcast, Cody and his co-host Katie they talk about that because this guy goes and commits a shooting and it turns out he's a fan of yours, and that's really weird. And you have to really stop and think. But then, like in that case, the guy was violent and had been violent for a long time, completely independent of, he obviously wasn't inspired by the words of these people. There was never a time when Cody Johnston was like, boy, it would be great if someone would shoot up a nightclub. I'm not going to do it. And I'm not saying you should do it, but that would really, the type of Trump.
Yeah. I have a MAGA friend on Facebook, and his whole rebuttal to the El Paso thing was like, what about Dayton? He was an Elizabeth Warren fan. And I said, okay, you point out to me what words and actions that Elizabeth Warren have done that you think led this guy to this type of act. You list them all. List all those things that Elizabeth Warren has said that would have led this guy to this act. And then I'll take an hour out of my day to list all of the bullshit that Trump has said that led to the El Paso terrorist.
Right.
And of course, he never responded because it's ridiculous, right?
Right.
Even if this guy in El Paso was just a Trump supporter, right? And he went and did that, I don't think anyone would be saying, oh, this is Trump's fault. It's just the fact that he put it in writing.
Right. Now, I do want to make one thing clear, because your MAGA friend and the local talk radio here in Yakima, they like to point out that it's ridiculous to blame Trump, and that, like you said, white supremacy has existed since long before Trump. And, a lot of people are pointing out Trump's use of the word invasion, which is a word that Trump has used. I also have, I'm trying to look for it right now, but it's a 1979 issue of U.S. World News, and the cover is a couple of Mexicans being arrested, Mexicans in big bell bottoms and very era appropriate attire, being arrested
my
by
clients still wear those, by the way.
Right. And the headline in big bold letters is "Invasion Out of Control?" ? So the point is, this is kind of who we are as a country. It's who we've been for quite some time. And we need to be willing to sort of call out Trump and also reconcile who we are and try and get to the bottom of that, right?
I always like to think that we're progressing as a country, even though recently it seems that we are regressing. But I think Obama said something about the arc of our history is always going up and going forward. And actually, one thing I agree with Obama, I agree with that. So I do think hopefully we're seeing the death throes of this type of ideology. But I think we'll continue to move forward. And I guess if you look back in 1979, that headline, if they tried to get away with that headline today, there would be a big uproar, right? They wouldn't even think about it. So you can think about the progression that we're making. Unfortunately, we have a president who is still living in that time.
1979.
I do want to talk about this one editorial that was in the Washington Post, and it talks about it was a Foreign Service officer named Chuck Park. He worked in embassies in Mexico City, other places around the world. He was just a Foreign Service officer that worked for a Department of State that would be responsible for diplomacy, across the globe. And he just resigned. And it was interesting because he was hired during the Obama administration. And he said how he was horrified when Trump became president. And there's a lot of talk about on the right that there's some type of deep state, right? That there are people in there that they're Obama synchrosants, or they're the ones they've been there for a long time and they're really going to working against Trump every way. And this is their big conspiracy about this deep state. Then there are people probably like us who are kind of hoping that's true, right? Hoping that there's some type of resistance that is keeping him from doing all these horrible things. This guy, Chuck Park, calls it's not a deep state, it's not a resistant state, he calls it a complacent state. And I think immigration lawyers will appreciate this. He's saying that even people like-minded like him, who are really against what Trump does, what he stands for, just kind of go along with it. They work there, they have a good job, they have good benefits, and there's no pushback. So it's like, okay, well, you want us to do that? We'll do that. Well, maybe we think it's a terrible idea or whatnot, but we'll just do it. And they go along with it. And I think we see that with immigration judges. I think we see that with government attorneys. Yeah, maybe in their heart of heart, they know that the stuff that's going on is terrible, but they're not going to push back against it. There are very few, I think, resistors within this government. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. Maybe, when there's an administration, people shouldn't be trying to use their powers to push back against someone who's lawfully elected. Maybe that's what we have elections for. But I think if anyone has held on to the illusion that there are kind of good people in the government that are going to keep this guy from going off the rails, should probably let it go, because I just don't think that's true at all.
Although, we do still have Ivanka, who's one of his principal advisors, and
Thank
she
God.
is there to occasionally do a cover of People magazine to say something like, I disagree with my father. And so that's pretty bold resistancing, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, we're starting, not that people know because this is recorded, we're starting a little bit late today because I was going to have a hearing where the judge was going to read a decision on an asylum case of mine, a decision that he's going to grant the case. And this woman is from Liberia. She's been in the country almost 30 years. She fled Liberia right at the beginning of the Civil War. Half her family was either executed or imprisoned. She was taken as a soldier's wife, subject to repeated rapes and forced labor. She was able to get away. She came to the U.S. She filed timely for asylum back in 1993. For many reasons, something happened. I think she got TPS from Liberia. She didn't get called for an interview until like 2014. They referred her to immigration judge. Her testimony was great. Everything very credible, very believable. And the judge is going to grant her asylum based on humanitarian asylum, basically. If really bad things happen to you, even if there are changes in the circumstances, they can still grant asylum. Now, before Trump, we probably would have had a 10-minute hearing on this case. But now that trial attorney, who's been there for a long time, he wants to reserve appeal. And why does he want to reserve appeal? Because he has to reserve appeal, because that's what they do. They can't just accept a decision. And it's all coming down. So this is a guy that, if you told me at the beginning, I would have said, oh, he would have been one that would have pushed back. He wouldn't be one that would just kind of like, he was one of the good ones. But like this guy is saying, this Chuck Park, it's a complacent state. Okay, yeah, I have my job to do. I know that doesn't make sense. It's a good decision. She deserves asylum and she should be granted asylum. But I have my pension to look forward to, so I'm not going to push back and rock the boat.
Right. That's such a good point. It's been sad to see, early on in the early days when it seemed like there was going to be some resistance. Remember, there were all the rogue Twitter accounts, rogue national parks and things like that. But, at the end of the day, people have real needs and are able to sort of extract themselves from what they see to be the problem. This is just my role. It's this little thing over here. It's not that important. And then the machine just sort of marches on.
If you see what happened in Mississippi.
Yeah, let's talk about
that. So Mississippi, about 680 immigrants were arrested at some type of food processing plant.
And I just wanted to say congratulations to ICE. Sometimes something happens that just helps you sleep better at night, knowing that some justice has been served, that the streets are safer.
And they did it on their first day of school, which is amazing. It's crazy that kids are going back to school this early. But it's the first day of school.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, no one out there think that this is like happenstance. That, they didn't realize it was the first day of school. Imagine that, your child's going to school for the first time. Maybe it's their first day of school ever. Very nervous. They probably had a bad day at school. They want to go back home and see their mom and dad. And they get back home and mom and dad are in jail.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That is just shitty. People who did this, the ICE officers, who did this, if they're listening to the show, you are bad people. There's no two ifs, ands, or buts. You're bad people. There's a video of one ICE officer talking to a girl and probably a neighbor or teacher, I don't know what. And he's trying to reassure her. He's saying, hey, don't worry. We're going to process your mom. She's going to be here with us for a little bit, and we'll let her go. And you know what? She'll go see a judge. And you know what? Let me just tell you something. She has a U.S. citizen child, so she's not going to be deported.
Wah, wah, wrong.
Yeah. I mean, maybe she won't, but
Right.
just because she has a U.S. citizen child, maybe she will. Maybe she has a prior order of deportation. There's nothing she can do, right?
Right. Maybe she has 9 years continuous physical. There's all types of things that could disqualify her from staying. So you're saying the ICE officers are bad people, but these are the things that they tell themselves in a situation like this. Like, hey, well, ICE is always saying we're not a benefits agency. We're not here to help people. But in order to sort of sleep well at night, a lot of these people have to think of themselves that way. Like, actually, a lot of the people that we arrested and detained might end up getting papers in the removal context or as a removal defense, which is true, but it's also not a guarantee, especially when you consider, that mom who has to now go before a judge. It's not like she's facing some docile ICE attorney. Like you just mentioned, these are now ICE attorneys they've got their heels dug in, and they're going to fight any type of grant of relief. And so that advice is incorrect.
Well, it's how they deal with it, right? And then also how they deal with it is, hey, you know what? Our bosses gave us these orders. I don't like to use it too much, but it's like we're just following orders thing.
Right.
And also the whole like, hey, you know what? We're just applying the law. Because I've had trial attorneys tell me this. Hey, we're just applying the law. If you have a problem with the law, talk to your congressman. Okay. I mean, you literally don't have to apply the law. Like you could just walk away. You have that free choice. I mean, we're not in a society that is forcing you to do this job.
Well, and the law is also like a mushy thing. So like in a cancellation case where you're trying to prove hardship to the kids, the law doesn't say the TAs have to say that like a suicidal child won't suffer enough hardship. You know what I mean? Like that's a bad example. And it's maybe hard to follow for non-lawyer friends, but basically the law is not so clear.
Well, I mean, there are circumstances, right, where the law is clear. And I get their point on that. Someone's only been in the country for 8 years, right? And so they're maybe not eligible for what they call cancellation removal, where you need 10 years. Someone has been convicted of a certain type of crime that you really can't argue is not removable offense. But so many times we get like the case I was talking about with the asylum. There's no reason why the government couldn't have just said, yeah, we agree with you, judge, or, whatever. We don't agree with you, but we're not going to appeal. If you just look at on the human level, the woman has been here for 30 years. She's in her 50s, always been gainfully employed, has no criminal record. So whether you believe her story or not, you think, this is a person that we could just kind of let go. Like, why fight that case?
Right.
And that's not, from my standpoint, that's not complying with the law.
You talked about coming home from school and your parents aren't there. There's situations where I would be fine with that. Like if I came home from the first day of 8th grade and my dad had done a bunch of rapes, I would be deeply upset and troubled by the news that my dad was a big raper. But he should be arrested for that. And when you look at the crimes of these people, now the worth of an immigrant shouldn't depend on like the shittiness of their job, but I can't even imagine doing a tour of one of these poultry farms, yet alone dedicating my entire life's work to making one of those places run. It just seems to me like having somebody come mow your lawn and then calling the cops because they're trespassing. I mean, there's just something deeply absurd about treating them as illegals. When it's crazy. It's like, what are we doing?
Well, one interesting part of this is that there were like 9 women there, or maybe more, who had just won a discrimination lawsuit against the company. And then this happened. So
Yeah.
you kind of wonder the motivation. I mean, 680 people. ICE put out a statement later on saying, hey, we released like 300 of those people, like, good for us. It's like, really?
Right.
That's good for you? Where are the other, 380 people? Why aren't they released? And just think what it does to a town, right? Because this didn't happen in Manhattan. This happened in a small town, Mississippi. They were saying like the next day, over a quarter of the students weren't at school.
Right.
And it's going to be interesting to track this town to see what happens to it. The people in the town, I don't know how they feel about it, right?
Right.
There are probably people in the town that are happy that this happened. There are probably people in the town that are very upset that this happened. But I imagine it's not going to have a positive effect on the town, because I don't think tomorrow we're going to see a busloads of 700 people going to apply for those jobs.
Right. There's not like a bunch of white people beelining to this town in Mississippi so they can apply for these newly freed up jobs that had previously been stolen by undocumented workers.
But you're going to see what's going to happen to those businesses, the restaurants in town, the supermarkets. First of all, everyone's going to leave, right?
Right.
But isn't that what they want, though, right? Right? They want terror. That's the whole point. They want terror. They want people to be afraid. They want to wreak havoc. So if that town goes to shit, then the white people can say, hey, look, it's the Mexicans like really screwed us over. It's their fault.
Right.
Even if logically that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Just like this old magazine with the word invasion on it. And we can sort of both be highly critical.
Really need to change up your waiting room reading material. Like update it a little bit.
Yeah. Just like with the word invasion, we can be highly critical of our sundowning president for his use of the word while coming to terms with our troubled past. Andrea Signs, she's a colleague of ours. She's been on the show before, Jeopardy champion and all-around incredible person. She posted this on Facebook the other day. The 2007 New Bedford factory raid put me on the path I am on now. I was 25 and in law school. I did not know that our government would bring guns, helicopters, dogs, and handcuffs to arrest hundreds of loving mothers and fathers working double shifts whose kids were waiting for them. I remember a nursing baby was hospitalized. The upside was that the community response was amazing. The majority of folks who got lawyers weren't deported. Many of them were indigenous Guatemalan people with good asylum claims. I later had a few of the cases. At least they prosecuted the factory owners. The other upside was I decided I would defend families separated by detention. Here we are again. They did this to kids on the first day of school. How do they go to the second day? I don't have a real point today, kind of like this show, right? Yeah. I don't have a real point today, just having a flashback to when I didn't know this could happen. Again, we can be critical of the guy in charge and the agency and their decisions, while also informing people, not in a I liked the Kinks before they were popular kind of way, but informing people that this is a deeper part of our history and we need to figure out a way to stop doing this, right? It's not going to be enough to have some Democratic president for 4 years or 8 years, and then in 2030, we're talking about the same thing. Not that we'll have a planet by 2030, but
just the fact that you skipped over the Democratic president as if we wouldn't have these problems with one of those, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, part of what I'm trying to say is to the extent that things changed, and they didn't entirely, there were all kinds of problems with the Obama administration, but it wasn't enough to just sort of like change enforcement priorities. I mean, that was great, right? But the laws are still there. So you might have a Democratic president who is really good on immigration, has all kinds of great discretionary decisions and tools, but just like what we're seeing with DACA, unless you get real structural change, the next guy who comes along could take it away. I mean, I hear what you're saying too.
Yeah. So, that's another great show of upbeat material.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this.
Okay.
When did you hear about the El Paso shooting?
I think it was Saturday, and I was like in the mountains with my family. It was a horrible timing. It was
a horrible time with your family? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, horrible timing for me, I'm the real victim here because I should have been on.
Did they ruin it for you?
Really ruined it for me.
When you're up in Mount Rainier looking for rocks, it really ruins that. Good old terrorist attacks.
Right. Yeah. What about you?
I learned early that there was a mass shooting at a Walmart in El Paso. That was the only news I heard. And I immediately jumped to the conclusion that it was a white guy who was anti-immigrant. And I was right. I nailed it. And then especially when the news was that the terrorist was caught alive, then he's definitely a white guy.
Right. One of the underreported things is that they've sort of like done away with a lot of the tools and things that they've used to investigate domestic terror and white supremacy. And you want the government to be able to keep you safe. And hopefully there's enough people still there who can, I don't know what I'm even trying to say.
It's a weird thing after these shootings. So on Tuesday night in our community, we always have, it's called National Night Out. It's a national thing. So they might do it all over the place, where it's run by in our town, it's Cherry Hill, New Jersey, the Cherry Hill Police Department. They have games and stuff for kids, and there are things to eat and music and all that. And it's a nice time. And we go every year. It used to be right across from where we live. Now we moved, so we had to drive there. But it's always a nice time. And we were kind of like, there are a lot of people. And we're thinking, the whole like shooting thing. But we're like, okay, well, it's run by the police department. A lot of cops are going to be there. So we didn't have too much to worry about. But even with all the police officers there that are, mingling with the crowd and they're running games, they have a dunk tank and they do a demonstration with their canines. There are other police officers just walking around in the crowd, holstered up with their guns. And there were drones flying over the event. And we hadn't seen that before. And just an acknowledgement like, yeah, you're not safe. You can't feel safe. And the reason why you can't feel safe is
because you're not.
There's so many people with guns, right?
I remember being in Guatemala. There was like a little shopping mall, and you've probably seen this in Peru too. Just some security dudes with like AK-47s. It's like, oh, okay. I guess I feel safer, kind of. But yeah, it's sad that we have resorted to that. And then you probably saw the video of Times Square when a motorcycle backfired. That's like the very definition of a country living in terror.
Trying to relate this to my MAGA friend on Facebook, who's all about like, the whole thing about racism is baloney. It's not true. My wife is brown. I have 2 kids. One has kind of got my complexion. The other one's brown. Trying to make these people understand, like, right now we have a president who is targeting my family, right? And it's not like this guy in El Paso went into the Walmart and was asking people for their ID and checking their immigration status before he was killing them, right?
Not that would have made it any better.
No, but it's just completely random. Brown people, we shoot and kill. And it's terrifying for those of us who have loved ones and those of us who have friends and even clients, right? People say, oh, your clients. Well, we actually do care about our clients, right? And we actually even have empathy, and we're not monsters. We care about those people in El Paso that we've never met, right?
Right.
It's not that hard.
I was going to say, you were starting to sound like the presidential candidates who say things like, I care about healthcare because my daughter is a diabetic. It's like, oh, okay, that's the only reason you care. I think it was Steve Bullock who said he changed his mind on gun control because he had a nephew who was shot and killed, which, welcome to the party. But also, like, why do you need to have a loved one struck down to feel empathy? Yeah. But for some of these people, that's just the way it is, I guess. What a fun show, Matthew.
So why don't you tell me some good thing that happened to you? Or one of your clients.
Right,
not to you. No one cares what happens to you. But
I had this case. This lady came to me. Her husband had been deported earlier this year, and it was a reinstate. I could tell that means he'd been deported earlier. I tried to find out the circumstances of his prior deportation, and it sounded like And around 2004, he was just picked up in Oregon for driving without a license and deported right away, like without being able to see a judge or anything. And I thought, well, okay, that's weird. He's got 3 kids and the family is, besides the emotional aspect, like who cares about that, right? Feelings. They're running out of money. They're draining not just their own savings, but the savings of other family members that they're depending on. I mean, it's a critical situation without this father. So we file a FOIA and we get the A file back, the alien file from the immigration court. And we find out that he had signed what they used to do here locally, which is a stipulated order of removal, where ICE would basically put this thing in front of them saying, I have rights. I can go to a judge. I can apply for some sort of defense. I don't want to. I want to waive all of that and I want to be deported immediately. And so this thing's got a signature on it. And what ICE would do is they'd take this to the judge and the judge would say, oh, I guess this guy doesn't want a hearing. And they would order them removed. And the circumstances of the removal were really weird. He was being moved from Seattle back to Portland, back to Seattle, and just in a matter of days, sort of back and forth. And then the next thing, he's in Mexico. So he came right back. That was in 2004. And then it wasn't until 2019 that they, again, deported him, basically reusing that old removal order. So I filed a motion to reopen his original removal order and argued that this is super unconstitutional. There's a good Ninth Circuit case on these old stipulated removal orders saying basically that they're highly problematic and blah, 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 blah. So it's been sort of on pins and needles waiting for a decision. And we got an opposition from ICE. So ICE opposed our motion. And their reason was basically this one part of the law says that once your removal order is reinstated, that's it. Like you don't get to reopen it. And they didn't even bother trying to argue that like the underlying removal order was fair or that it was a voluntary waiver of his rights. They were just like, we think that there's a technicality here. Anyhow, so the judge granted the motion, which means he gets to come back and he will be in removal proceedings, but he's got really good removal defenses available to him. And reading the decision from the judge was awesome because the judge was kind of outraged. I mean, not explicitly, but you could just sense it. Like the judge realized that this really unfair thing had happened and he was going to do something about it. This is going back to something you were saying earlier, and we've had this debate a bunch of times, but I'm grateful for the judges that have slogged it out and who have probably been very tempted to quit, but who know that they can still find these places to make a difference. I don't know that every judge would have granted the motion, not because it's undeserved, but it's discretionary. It's up to the judge, essentially, in a case like this. So anyways, I've been living high off that. How about you?
Well, good work. Good work. I mean, I guess I kind of mentioned it earlier about my client who the judge is granted asylum, though the government may end up appealing it. But it's really deserving. I mean, the lady's a really good lady. Terrible things happened to her. And it would just be... So the government attorneys really arguing that this woman should be put on a plane and sent back to Liberia, where all these horrible things happened, a place that she hasn't seen for 30 years. She came when she was maybe 24 years old. And it's just that is unconscionable. There is something I saw on Twitter about a man who was deported to Iraq. He had never lived in Iraq. He was born in Greece in the refugee camp. Spent most of his life in Detroit. I guess his criminal record, he had disorderly conduct and a home invasion. Apparently he suffered from mental illness. He was homeless here. And he was just picked up off the street and sent back to Iraq. And there's a video of him in Iraq saying, like, I don't speak the language. I don't know anything about it, in his very American accent. And he died a few days after that video. And it's just like there were people along the way that could have stopped it. Maybe he's not the most sympathetic person in the world, but if you think a person like that should be deported to their death, then what you're really saying is that we should have the death penalty for these types of crimes, and we don't. And if you think that, then again, I'm just going to say I think you're a bad person. So in reality, the U.S. government murdered this individual. How do you think that you can send someone like that back to Iraq? It befuddles me. But the good judge on my case with the Liberian woman, yeah, I'm glad that he's sticking it out. We always kind of wonder how much longer he's going to have. But right now he's still on the bench, so that's good.
All right, Matthew. Well, we've gone way long. Holy cow.
Oops, sorry.
So
the producer can tighten this up. It's funny. Sometimes I think people realize how little preparation we put into the show. They might not be shocked.
Mm-hmm.
And then they might say, hey, if you guys actually prepared,
it would be really
right,
good.
and you could make it better. I don't think we could. I'll be honest. I think we are peaking.
We are peaking. I think, there's something to be said about that. All right. Well, I got to go. I got somebody here, and we'll talk to you next week.
Good night.
Se vuelve mambo y estribillo. Se le hace daño al son que poco a poco con la reiteración pierde su brillo.
Y en el arte se debe tener sello, algo que te distinga entre la gente, con imaginación crear lo bello y que sea distinto y diferente.
Y en la vida se debe andar derecho, rendir tributo a quien se lo merece, con imaginación crear
Ahora yo te traigo un son para conquistar tu mente. demás.